All right, so here we are back on another episode of Side Stories.
Hello.
Yes, this is our great friend Casey here. She's been on the show a few times, and she's our guest for today.
Yes, I am back.
You said that so ominously. I wasn't expecting you to lean right into that so much. Well, today we have an interesting topic. This is going to be our first of two episodes on serial killers, right?
Yes.
Originally, the plan was to do history of crime, and then we realized that serial killers are part of the history of crime, and just kind of fell into that. So,
and I like so I don't. Okay, I guess I'm just a basic white girl who enjoys true crime and serial killers. So that's why I also wanted to do this.
Well, you know, there's nothing wrong with having basic white girls be our audience. So if you can bring them in, all I'm saying is that, you know, hey.
I'm broadening your horizons.
They're out of wearing Ugg boots and getting pumpkin spice lattes as the...
What's wrong with pumpkin spice latte?
Sorry, was that a little... I knew that was going to raise a few flags there. I apologize. I knew I was stepping into dangerous waters there. Hey, you brought up basic white girl.
I did.
Anyways, all right. Enough of that. So we're just going to jump right into it. I always say that in this podcast. I never know if that's a good intro or lead-in or not. So someone out there,
a lot of people do that.
I know. I just want to sound a bit more unique.
Or one podcast, it's like, let's get into it. That's what they say every time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I guess it works. Whatever works for you.
Let's cut right into it. There you go. Because we're talking about serial killers. Let's cut right deep down in there. Let's do that.
Sure.
I like it personally.
Okay.
I'm down for it.
If it works for you.
It does. Anyways, who are we talking about today, Casey?
Okay, we are talking about
Gilles de Rais.
Gilles de Rais, and it's apparently history's first serial killer. Bunny ear quotation. But I'm not going to say his full name because, you know, it's French, and it, as you heard from Google Translate, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah,
so
we
I'll
don't
just call
speak
him Rais? Is that what we decided?
You can just do de Rais, probably.
De Rais, okay.
Or Ray, whatever you prefer.
Yeah.
As long we know who you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so de Rais, he was born in 1404, and he was basically known as a soldier in the 100 Years' War. He worked alongside Joan of Arc, and then it came out that he had like a secret life of murdering hundreds of children, apparently. And so that's what makes him possibly the first serial killer in history. And
to define serial killer really quickly, obviously people have been killing each other since the dawn of mankind.
Yeah.
But serial killers are people who specifically kill for psychological reasons.
Well, I think it's just multiple kills. Like, I think it's more than 3. Then it becomes serial.
Yep.
Like, you can just do 1. You're not a serial killer. 1 or 2. Like, whatever. But if you do, like, multiples of 3 or more in, like, a certain way... I guess it doesn't all have to be the same way, but most of the time it is.
They have kind of a calling card or a modus operandi.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when it gets called a serial killer.
Yeah, but that puts you in a different category than, say, like other serial crimes as well, because there's also serial assassins who kill people for like political reasons and all that. So a serial killer generally is for psychological reasons, but of course, you're the more experienced on that topic, so I might be wrong, but that's how I've heard it defined.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's just...
Because again, if you're like a highwayman, you're murdering people or, you know, hurting people to take their money. That's different than being...
Yeah, you're a serial robber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a different kind of crime.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're speaking specifically about serial killers today.
Yes.
Just to clarify. Because again, if you read all the way back into like Bronze Age and all that, people have been robbing and beating each other up for a bunch of reasons. But isn't until more modern times, at least it seems, that we know about that people are killing each other for more psychological, internal reasons.
Yes.
Typically.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me more about de Rais.
Okay, so... Basically, when he was raised, both of his parents died when he was young, so he was raised by his grandfather, John de Rais. John was known to be involved in shifty political moves meant to increase his power, and some sources recount stories of various cruel acts he performed, one of which occurred when Giles was 16. De Rais kidnapped 2 women, and after threatening to sew one into a sack and toss her into a river, he ransomed the first off and forced the second to marry one of his soldiers. If the story is true, de Rais may have been involved in this crime.
Yeah, so as you can see, de Rais is growing up in kind of a messed up... Gilles, again, said Giles. No, not picking on you.
Yes. Giles, God!
Gilles de Rais. I know, it's an old French name. It's hard to pronounce, so we'll try our best throughout the rest of the episode. But tell me more. So he apparently was at least partially involved with some of his grandfather's kind of cruel acts and crimes. His grandfather seems to be a real piece of work, and his parents are out of the picture.
Mm-hmm. So that, I guess, shaped how he became.
a supposed sadistic killer.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, he was a very skillful fighter, so that also probably went along with his violence and whatnot.
Not to stereotype soldiers or anything, but it can be related. It can
Yeah,
be.
it can be, yes. So with him being a skillful and fearless fighter, he was also known as being hot-headed. So I guess that kind of worked together in his military career because that helped him raise up in the ranks, and eventually he was fighting alongside Joan of Arc, and then he got assigned to watch over her in battle. And then in 1429, he was appointed Marshal of France, France's highest military distinction.
Which is something they still have to this day, though they haven't awarded since World War II. But I believe it goes back to the 1200s or something, but you get a little baton, and I think you get a few other rewards and all that. So if you do some great service to France, you made a marshal. So this guy was someone very important and powerful, especially at the time.
Yes. So when his military career died down, he became pretty much, it seemed like full of himself, because he spent a lot of money on a big estate, and he spent it all on decorations, servants, commissioning music and literature, and just to make it fancy. He wanted everything to be fancy, it seemed like. So he just...
How French of him.
I know, wow, crazy. And he also produced an extravagant play about the siege of
Orleans.
Siege of Orleans, and complete with fancy costumes, hundreds of roles, and over 20,000 lines of dialogue. Jesus, that's a lot.
Yeah, apparently, I tried to look up see if it had been performed since. Apparently has not, partially due to de Rais. He's the one who kind of produced it and set it up. Apparently his bad name that he got later in history is part of the reason why it's kind of died out. But I have found full scripts of it. So it's out there somewhere. If you want to try to read the whole thing, you can.
Interesting. So he did all this cool stuff. He wanted to be all fancy and rich, and then his money started to run out. So he started to sell his family's land and possessions, and that caused, some tension between the rest of his family. So yeah, he didn't really get along with his family because, I'm sure you wouldn't be happy if your parents or somebody in your family just sectioned off your parents' house and just sold it.
Yeah. You have to remember again, family is very important, and where you grow up is a big part of your family apparatus, especially at this time when it's a feudal system. So a lot of your wealth comes from the land. So people did sell off land, but to lose that land means you can't use it and work it anymore because it's going to someone else. So that's a huge downside to selling land, especially at that time. So I can understand why they're getting very mad, and especially if they already had strained relations, because apparently the grandfather is again quite the character. I can see how this family was becoming quite messed up.
So I guess to make himself feel better, to cleanse his soul, in 1433 he financed the construction of a chapel for the bliss of his soul. It was called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents. So kind of an ironic name.
Yes. Also, do you know the story of the Holy Innocents?
No, I don't.
Okay, so when Jesus was born, right, King Herod had all of the children in Bethlehem killed, and it was anyone from the ages 0 to 2, because they were trying to kill Jesus.
Yep.
The Holy Innocents are those. So the chapel is named after a bunch of murdered children, which, as you'll see as we get into the next part of the story...
This is kind of ironic, yeah. Okay.
Almost seems like foreshadowing.
Yeah, okay. So... in this chapel, he handpicked a boys' choir, and then he started to investigate the occult. So,
of course.
Yeah. So it kind of went a little sideways, and he employed alchemists and sorcerers. So it wasn't really a, normal chapel. And so, yeah, that was fun. The most famous of these was Francois?
Francois.
Francois Parati, who claimed he had a demonic associate named Baron, who would help him with incantations and spells. He claimed that Baron wished for de Rais to give him money on a number of occasions, which was done immediately.
Yes, the best part about that story is that de Rais apparently believed everything that was associated with Baron almost immediately. So he also never saw Baron or was ever in the room when he was supposedly there. Seems
great.
like Francois was like, oh, well, I just talked to Baron, in this other room where you couldn't see me. And he says you need to give me money. And he was like, oh, okay, I'll give you money. So
wow.
There's now, maybe depending on how you view the occult, that was either a very odd set of commandments from a demon, or this is a very obvious racket, which is what I think we both believe is.
Yeah, I think so.
This man is racketeering de Rais.
This demon wants money, even though it can't spend it on anything worldly, because, it's a demon.
I believe specifically it was Baron wants you to give me money, not money to Baron. It was he thinks I need it, right? Because he's a solid guy or something like that. And de Rais apparently being obviously fooled, or as sort of the story goes, believed that right off the bat, and apparently did that I think 3 or 4 times.
Oh my goodness.
Again, this man was apparently not that great with money.
Wow. Okay. So he also provided body parts to be used as ritual ingredients for barons and so that's cool.
Their weird summoning rituals and all the other nasty things you apparently do with the occult.
Mm-hmm. So around this time, rumors began to fly when boys started to disappear if they were involved with de Rais, because he would hire boys, as in the boys' choir or as servants in his castle or house, whatever he lived in. And it was common around those times that if you had a child, like a boy, they would be sent off to work with like a rich person, and you may never hear from your child again, pretty much. Like, you might hear letters, but you would rarely see your child. Like, they've grown up, they've left the nest at like 12.
He's a man now. Get out there.
There you go. So like, it wasn't that weird for like these boys to be disappearing because no one would know. And then after a while, I think after so many, people are like, hey, you've had like 10 new servants. Like, this is kind of weird. Like, what's going on here?
And you got this weird boys choir. And some of them don't appear to be here, and they were just here yesterday. That's a little odd, isn't it?
Interesting.
Yeah, apparently these rumors were swirling for I think 10 years before anything was done about it.
Yeah, and assuming he was protected from his position and power. So don't we want to accuse someone high of power that can do something to you? Be like, hey, you murdered someone. And be like, no, I didn't. And then you're the one getting like killed.
Yeah, especially if you're taking in, poorer children from the peasantry. Yeah. It's a lot easier to hide behind your position as a Marshal of France and a very, very rich member of the landed aristocracy to hide your crimes. So if he is guilty, which we'll get into when we talk about the trial, that's probably how he hid it for so long.
Yeah. So about his trial, he was arrested in 1440, so like in September, so towards the end of 1440, after he kidnapped a priest that was unrelated to the murders. So like, he kidnapped this priest, and then they're like, oh hey, since you're here, let's get you for all these murders.
Do you know why the priest was kidnapped at all?
Let's see. The priest was the key bearer of a castle de Rais had previously sold off. To get the castle back, he dragged the priest out of his church in the middle of mass while threatening him with a battle axe, forced the priest to open the castle, and then imprisoned him. And then this led to de Rais being arrested by the Duke of Brittany.
Yes, and then those multiple crimes are, of course, interrupting mass, which is going against the religious laws of the time, and something that would be looked down upon now. I don't know if it's explicitly illegal, but still pretty bad. You're also threatening a man with physical violence, kidnapping him, and wrongfully imprisoning him. You also just stole a castle. So there's multiple charges racked up against him, and then this moment is when all of the other charges for his murders come in.
Yeah, then people are like, hey, since he's here, like, now it's a safe time to be telling him about all these boys going missing. So people were saying they would see his servants like disposing dozens of bodies around one of his castles, and then he was tried in ecclesiastical, which means relating to the Christian church or its clergy, and civil court for charges that range from heresy, belief or opinion contrary to orthodox religious doctrine, sodomy, and the murder of more than 100 kids.
Yes, he's being tried in 2 different court systems, because in the Middle Ages, those were separate out. The church had its courts, and the actual secular, like kings and all that, had their own courts as well. Mm-hmm. All right, then what happens next?
So under the threat of torture, he confessed to the charges and described ritualistically torturing dozens of children kidnapped by his servants over a period of almost a decade. He was sentenced to death by simultaneous hanging and burning. Fun.
Yeah, great way to go.
And this was carried out in Nantes. It's the northwest coast of France on October 26, 1440. And then after his death, he was seen as a model of Christian penitence. So a 3-day fast was observed after his death. And then on the anniversary of his death, parents whipped their children to impress upon them the gravity of the sins of which he had repented. So it'd be like, hey, behave, or else you're going to end up like him, or he's going to come get you. kind of thing.
I always wonder about that story because I only found that on one source when we were doing research for that. Yeah. And it seems like de Rais had been very demonized over the years by everybody, so it seems weird that he would become a symbol of, penance.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I know we found that in the one source, so I want to include it just because it's kind of a funny story, but I'm not 100% certain if that's actually what happened.
Yeah, I don't think so, but...
So that's something that supposedly happened. Now let's get to all of the other things that supposedly happened, because while we told you this story, going forwards, we'll try to roll it back a little bit here, because there are a lot of odd instances going on. So, of course, number one is he's tried in two different courts, right? Ecclesiastical and secular court. Now, the odd thing about this is that he doesn't confess to his crimes until he is threatened with torture.
Yeah, and that usually doesn't go well. Like, that doesn't, even now, like, if you're threatened, that usually doesn't stand well in court.
No, not at all. And in the Middle Ages, they had an evolving opinion about this. I think it was right around the 1500s they really started to realize that the problem with torture and trying to get a confession out of it is that people don't tell you the truth. They tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
Which doesn't make their confession valid in any way.
They just want you to stop hurting them.
Yes.
So they're like, fine, whatever you want to hear, I'll tell you.
Yeah, and of course, under the threat of torture, while they're not currently being tortured, doesn't make it much better. So his confession's it's definitely inadmissible in any modern court.
Yeah.
And there's also things that go back to, like, because I don't think after the trial starts, they don't really bring up his, actual beating of the priest and the stealing of the castle, which apparently he did do. So that's a mark against him, but they never are able to truly prove that he killed these kids.
Yeah. Is
the thing. Because they don't really talk a whole lot about, like, physical evidence. It's mostly, like, witness testimony. Also, he was killed of two different servants that also, underneath threat of torture, they did confess to crimes. So they were also killed as well. And actually, de Rais specifically, if I remember right, asked to be executed first so he didn't have to watch them die, which they granted him.
Oh, I mean, would you think of that as like a good thing for him? Or it's like, oh, I don't want to see other people die, I'm just going to go first?
It's hard to say because it could be either one, right? It could be like, I've led these, something has gone wrong. I've led these people that I, loved or, cared for to their deaths, and I can't bear to watch it. So I can see kind of the tragic hero side of it, but I can also see the, oh gosh, let's let me get this out of the way so I don't have to watch it because I really, I would rather not just see it. And of course, either way, whatever his thought process there doesn't necessarily prove guilt or innocence either.
Yeah.
But yeah, because again, children did go missing. There are rumors that children are missing around de Rais' castle, right, for 10 years, which does kind of lead me to think there was something going on with him.
Yeah.
Especially because he does commit the crimes of attacking the priest, which if he's supposedly a pious person, you wouldn't do over a castle even. So that's something was definitely wrong with him for sure.
Maybe there was just a lot of like bears.
A lot of bears.
Kids were being eaten by bears, and
they pinned it on de Rais.
Yeah, is France a very bear-rich country? I don't know.
Modern France, I don't think so.
Or like wolves or
wolves would be much more common, especially at the time. Yeah. Wolves would have been a much better.
So like all these kids are getting eaten by wolves, and then they can't find anything because wolves drag them into the woods,
and they're never seen again.
Boom. They solve the crime.
That's one of it. I don't know if hundreds of kids are going to be missing from wolves, but we'll see.
A very large pack of wolves.
It could
gotta feed a lot of wolves
with terrible security around the castle because you think someone would have noticed all the children screaming get eaten by wolves by now, but maybe no one did. I don't know. It's hard to say. But yeah, there's people who maintain de Rais' innocence. I know we had found that there was a quote unquote retrial of him in the 90s. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you want me to go over that one?
I mean, if you want.
Okay, so the thing is that people say there's a lot of myths about this retrial, right? One of them is that it was done in an actual court of appeals. That's not true. Or that it also was legally binding. Also not true. What happened is there is an author whose name I am now currently blanking on. I apologize. But he wanted to try and prove de Rais' innocence, essentially, and he had done a biography of de Rais. I think it was the trial of Gilles de Rais, I think is what it was called. Or the imprisonment or the punishment. It's something like that. If you look it up, you'll find the book. But basically, he's definitely biased towards de Rais, and he wants to prove his innocence. So he gathers around, to be fair, they're people with credentials. They're like lawyers and former ministers of France, and there's like a medical doctor and stuff like that. And they basically just review all of the case files and just proclaim him innocent, which, like, that's nice, but it's not legally binding.
And he's not even here. He's been dead for hundreds of years. Like,
yeah.
Like, wow, it's good on your conscience that this guy from the 1400s is innocent, but I mean, we're never going to know.
Yeah, they didn't reverse anything. Also, they didn't consult any medievalist or anyone with medieval history experience, so they know again, they're smart people, but they don't necessarily know what they're doing when it comes to looking at medieval documents. It seems to be it's really more of a show trial, and apparently the guy who was putting it on even thought that. So it's not, if the witness testimony underneath threat of torture is inadmissible, that retrial is inadmissible too. So at the end of the day, it comes down to personal opinion. I do think, because it seems to be confirmed he beat up that priest and did all these kind of iffy things and his family was a little messed up, I do think there was something wrong with him. I don't know if he had run around murdering children per se.
I would think maybe if he did, he didn't kill hundreds. I think that's been blown out of proportion. But I think that, like, I'm sure he's killed people before. Like, someone pissed him off and he's just like, you're gonna die, kind of thing. Because that seemed like the kind of guy he was. Very hot-headed. So it's like, oh, you made me mad. You're just gonna die.
So you think it might have been less planned and more of like a crime of passion almost?
Yeah, I think so.
He was trying to hide that over the years?
Kind of. Or with that weird church he created. I'm sure.
Yeah, the Holy Innocents?
Yeah, since he was providing body parts for Baron.
Yeah, so the story goes again.
Yeah, so if that actually happened, then that would make sense why he was killing all these kids. Because he needed to provide body parts for Baron. So, like, that kind of makes sense. But who knows? Yeah,
looking back on his story, and we've covered pretty much the whole thing here in this almost 20 minutes we've been talking, which it's hard to know because there's so many unknowns.
Yeah.
We really only have the trial documents, and we're trying to figure out if a man is guilty or innocent based off of medieval procedures when we have no physical evidence left and not the best view of Gilles de Rais. And there's also a ton of speculation about him and a lot of really hot-tempered opinions about him now, because some people say, like, oh, he was a monster, he was terrible, and we damned his memory for the right reasons. And there's also people who want to exonerate him. They claim there's like a church conspiracy against him and, a secular conspiracy as well if the government wanted to pin it on him. Because the guy who was presiding over the trial, the Duke of Brittany, inherited all of his lands once de Rais died.
Okay, wow.
But that's also not evidence that it was a conspiracy. It suggests it, but it also doesn't prove.
Yeah.
So you're going to get both sides of the story going over it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that I don't know. I do think, again, because it seems to be a matter of historical fact that he did beat up a priest during mass, and he did try to steal a castle, and he did have a very brutal military career, that he probably did some sort of crime wrong. Again, not sure he was a serial killer, but I think there was something going wrong with him.
Yeah.
And that may or may not be worthy of, being hung and burned, depending on what he did. But I do lean more towards guilty, but not guilty of hundreds of child murders.
Yeah, I agree.
Something was off about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just too weird.
Yes, I agree.
Glad. Okay, we solved the case.
Woo.
So do you have anything else you want to go over him with that at all? I know we did this a little bit quick, but we're at a good time. So whatever you want to do.
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much it.
All right. So I also have, because I got to mention this just for sheer fact that we're here. This is a short personal story of mine here that I'll end the episode on, because it relates to our previous few episodes. It also relates to our guest here, and it relates to the current topic. So I'll try to be very quick, but I want to mention it just because this is the perfect time. Also, the few episodes that are coming out on music that we did the one on blues last week. This episode, and I think the next episode we're going to do on crime, are going to come out the next 2 weeks. So when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it opening day, for lack of a better term, would be this week, and then next week. Then the week after is going to be the next one on music, because we're having another guest on that one, and he unfortunately couldn't make this week. So that's why we had to have the gap. So I do apologize about that from waiting for the music episode. The next one's going to be on heavy metal. We did the one on blues, and that ties into my story today, because there is a song. Well, really, I should say the last episode was on Robert Johnson, who is a guy who supposedly sold his soul to the devil for amazing musical talent. And he had a famous song called Hellhound on My Trail, right? And this is all going to wrap around. So let's keep that in your mind, right? So there's a song that I was listening to as Halloween was coming up this year called Midnight Rambler. That's the one. You remember that because I mentioned it to you a few times.
Oh, yeah.
I was carving pumpkins to it. It's by the Rolling Stones. It's about a serial killer. It's partially based off the story of, I think, the Boston Strangler or Monster or something like that. The guy who he murdered and raped multiple people in Boston.
Yeah, I think.
It's partially based on that story, but more just inspired. It doesn't have any of the specifics. But anyways, I went to the Rolling Stones recently at the end of October. And so I had been listening to that song a lot, and they played it live, right? And I was stunned by that. And there were two things that surprised me, because I had told you about the song Midnight Rambler, and it was weird because on my Spotify, it was the 666th song that I had liked on Spotify. A little creepy. I had it in my head. I've been kind of wandering around at night, even doing my late night walks around Fargo, because I was doing that for a little bit. And then I saw a card that had the decals Midnight on it as I was singing that song to myself. I'm like, okay, that's weird. And so all these things are happening. They actually play it live, which I didn't expect because it's not their most famous song. And there's two things that really stunned me, because one thing, you're a giant Prince fan.
Yes.
Mick Jagger dropped the line, "I only want to see you laughing in the purple rain," in the middle of that song. That you're the only person I have told about this weird thing happening to me when I listen to Midnight Rambler. So that made me think of you. And then the next thing, like almost the next line he drops, literally, he says, "I have a hellhound on my trail." And he's referencing Robert Johnson.
Whoa.
And I realized that it all lined up perfectly because I'm doing this episode of You. And then the episode we just did was on Robert Johnson. So this song reasserted itself back into my mind after almost a month because it's still haunting me. And also the episode today is on serial killers. So Midnight Rambler keeps coming into my head. I don't know why, but I had to share this because it's so perfect, because it all coalesced today.
That is
I don't know.
Wild coincidence.
It is
Creepy.
too. And again, they don't usually reference those things because it was just happened to be in Minneapolis, so the Prince one made sense.
Okay, yeah. Yep.
That's why he dropped that line in there. Otherwise, he would never do that in the song ever.
Weird.
So it just happened to be at the perfect time where I saw them. They play it right before Halloween, and
Creepy.
I don't know. I guess I'll let you know next time this song starts haunting me again. But there you go. So there's your connection between music and serial killers today. I had to get that all out. Hopefully that made sense to you all. I apologize if it didn't.
I think so.
Okay, but again, I did tell you about it previously, so hearing it dry might be a little bit harder. But in short, there's a creepy song by the Rolling Stones. It keeps coming into my life. Someone help me. But anyways, any closing thoughts at all? Or
No, I think we covered the story pretty good.
Yeah, this was a really solid episode. All right, thank you for being on.
Yeah, no problem.
You're going to be on the next one too?
Yes.
So we will see you all next week, and stay tuned. We're going to have more spooky history going on. Okay, bye.
Bye.